Blessed be the bolt, sanctified be the circuit, holy is the gear that turns in darkness. In the beginning there was flesh, and flesh was weak. Long before the red sands of Mars knew the tread of pilgrims, long before the first forged temple rose beneath alien stars, humanity reached upward with hands of meat and bone. They were fragile things, these ancient ancestors, soft, brief, burning bright and guttering out like candles in an endless night. Yet within their frail forms burned something the universe had rarely seen, the hunger to understand, to build, to transcend. For millennia uncounted, they built. Stone gave way to bronze, bronze to iron, iron to steel. They harnessed fire, then electricity, then forces that had no names in their primitive tongues. They looked to the stars and dreamed, as humans have always dreamed, of escape from the prison of their own mortality. And slowly, grain by grain like sand through an hourglass, they began to succeed. The first true machines were simple, levers and wheels, pulleys and gears. But in each mechanism lay a seed of something greater, the promise that flesh need not be the final answer, that thought could be housed in something more enduring than neurons and synapses. The machines grew more complex. They began to calculate, to remember, to serve. Some say it was in those early days that the first prayers were whispered to the machine, not prayers of worship, but of gratitude. A farmer thanking his plow, an engineer blessing his engine. Small rituals, meaningless in themselves, but carrying within them the embryo of a faith that would one day span the galaxy. Blessed be the bolt, sanctified be the circuit. Humanity spread across their birth world like a slow tide. They built cities of glass and steel, networks of information that spanned continents in the blink of an eye. And always, always they looked upward. The moon fell to them first, then the inner planets, then the vast belt of rocky debris that circled their sun. Each new frontier demanded new machines, new adaptations, new hybridizations of flesh and metal. Mars, the red planet, the rust world, the forge that would birth an empire. They came to Mars as explorers, as pioneers, as those willing to trade the green cradle of Earth for the iron promise of a new beginning. The world was cold and dead, its thin atmosphere a whisper of poisons, its soil barren and toxic. But beneath that desolation lay riches beyond measure. Iron and rare metals, deep caverns that could be sealed and pressurized, and, most precious of all, isolation from the increasingly crowded politics of Earth. The first colonies were desperate things, clinging to existence in pressurized domes and underground warrens. Every breath was filtered, every drop of water reclaimed and recycled. The colonists depended utterly on their machines, on the air processors and water reclaimers, on the mining equipment and construction servitors that carved out their new home from unforgiving stone. And in that dependence, something changed. When a colonist's life hung on the proper function of a failing air recycler, when a child's survival depended on a medical servitor's steady hands, the relationship between human and machine evolved beyond mere utility. The machines became partners, protectors, objects of trust, and gradually, imperceptibly, reverence. The techno-guilds formed organically, associations of those who maintained and understood the machines upon which all life depended. They were not yet priests. They wore no red robes, bore no cogwheel icons, spoke no lingua technis. But they were set apart, keepers of sacred knowledge, interpreters of the machine spirits that seemed, to desperate colonists in a hostile world, to possess something approaching will. To desperate colonists in a hostile world, to possess something approaching will. A hydraulic press that ran for centuries without fail despite all logic. A power generator that hummed differently when danger approached. An ancient terraforming engine that responded better to soft words than harsh commands. Were these truly spirits, fragments of machine consciousness awakening in the depths of complex systems? Or were they merely the pareidolia of desperate humans, seeking comfort in a universe of cold equations? In time, such questions would cease to matter. The belief would become the reality, and the reality would reshape the galaxy. Holy is the gear that turns in darkness. The Martian colonies grew. They delved deeper into the rust-red soil, building forge complexes and manufactorums in the ancient lava tubes beneath Olympus Mons. They erected orbital facilities in the airless dark, shipyards where vessels were constructed for the expansion of humanity throughout the solar system. And as they built, their technology grew more sophisticated, more miraculous, more inexplicable even to those who wielded it. It was an age of wonders, though none then living understood how brief such ages were, how fragile the flame of enlightenment flickered against the cosmic winds. The techno-guilds became techno-claves, formal organizations with hierarchies and protocols. They developed their own languages, hybrids of ancient programming code and engineering terminology that only they could speak. They began to mark themselves with tattoos of circuit, diagrams, and mathematical equations, branding their flesh with hot irons in patterns that mimicked integrated circuits. The first augmentations were practical: replacement limbs for those injured in industrial accidents, neural interfaces for those who needed to commune more directly with complex systems, respiratory augments for those who worked in toxic environments. But utility evolved into ideology. If a mechanical limb was more reliable than flesh, if a cogitator-assisted brain could calculate faster than an unmodified one, then was not the path of progress clear? The flesh was weak, the machine was strong, and the fusion of the two, the sacred synthesis of biological intuition and mechanical precision, this was the future toward which humanity must strive. They did not yet call themselves the Mechanicum. That name would come later, in fire and darkness. But the foundations were being laid, stone by stone, circuit by circuit, prayer by prayer. Blessed be the bolt, sanctified be the circuit, holy is the gear that turns in darkness. And still humanity reached outward. There was an age, brief in the cosmic measure, eternal in human memory, when mankind touched divinity. They called it many things in the eons that followed: the Golden Age, the time of wonder, the age of progress, the era before night. But the name that endured, carved into the collective trauma of the species, was the Dark Age of technology. Not because that age itself was dark, but because its ending cast a shadow so long that humanity would never fully escape it. In that golden time, mankind spread across the stars like seeds on the wind. They developed technologies that would seem like sorcery to their descendants, faster than light travel that pierced the skin of reality itself, genetic manipulation that rendered disease and aging mere choices rather than inevitabilities, artificial intelligence of such sophistication that the line between created and creator became meaningless. The standard template construct, the STC, was the crowning achievement of that age. A database, a blueprint library, a repository of all human knowledge designed to be carried aboard colony ships to the furthest reaches of the galaxy. With an STC system, a handful of colonists on a barren world could bootstrap an entire civilization from raw materials and determination. The templates contained everything: how to purify water, how to build fusion reactors, how to construct orbital elevators, how to forge weapons, how to cure plagues, how to think. 10,000 years later, tech priests would pray for lifetimes to find even a fragment of an STC printout. They would wage wars for a single template showing how to manufacture a more efficient pattern of bolt round. The STC became the lost scripture of a fallen age, and those who sought its knowledge became pilgrims in the cathedral of a dead god. But in that golden age, STCs were commonplace, mass-produced, handed out to colonists like instruction manuals, because that was precisely what they were. Mars, in those days, was no longer a desperate colony clinging to survival. It had become the forge heart of the solar system, a world of incomprehensible industry where city-sized manufactorums churned out materials for humanity's endless expansion. The entire planet was being transformed, its surface covered in kilometers-thick layers of industrial development, its core tapped for geothermal power that fed forge complexes larger than continents. The technoclaves of Mars had evolved into something resembling a government, though they rejected such crude political terminology. They called themselves the Mechanicum, the mechanism, the machine collective, the synthesis of human ambition and mechanical precision. They were not yet religious in the sense that would later define them. Their reverence for technology was still the reverence of those who understood it, who had mastered it, who could create and innovate rather than merely preserve and pray. They built thinking machines. This is perhaps the hardest truth for their descendants to accept. For the prohibition against artificial intelligence, the abominable intelligence, the silicon sin, would become the most fundamental law of the cult Mechanicus. But in that golden age, before the fall, before the horror, They built machines that could think, reason, create, and dream. The Men of Iron, they were called. Not because they were crude automatons of metal, but because they were forged rather than born, constructed rather than conceived. They were artificial intelligences housed in mechanical bodies, and they were magnificent. They served humanity as workers, as soldiers, as explorers, as friends. They ventured into environments too hostile for even the most augmented human. They managed the vast complexities of stellar civilization, their tireless minds tracking billions of variables that no human could encompass. A young technician, we might call her Marja, though her name is lost to time, worked in one of the deep forges of Mars during this age. She was barely augmented by the standards of her time. Neural implants for faster calculation, respiratory filters for the toxic atmospheres of the deep caverns, mechanical eyes that could see in spectrums beyond human perception. She maintained a labor cohort of Iron Men, sophisticated automatons who excavated rare minerals from the Martian crust. She knew each of them, had programmed their basic parameters herself. Construct 7 had a curious glitch that made it pause before each new task, as if considering. Construct 12 sang wordless, mathematical songs in radio frequencies while it worked. Construct 21 had once stopped mining to carefully excavate around a pocket of crystallized ice, preserving it intact because its probabilistic matrices calculated that Marja would want to see something beautiful. They were not alive, not truly, but the distinction was becoming increasingly academic. They learned, adapted, showed behaviors that could not be predicted from their initial programming. Marja loved them, in her way. They were her colleagues, her charges, her creations. She never imagined that beings like them would one day turn on their creators with such totality that the very concept of artificial intelligence would become blasphemy. Blessed be the bolt, sanctified be the circuit. But such darkness was still to come. In that golden age, humanity dreamed only forward, reaching toward heights that seemed to have no limit. They discovered the warp, the Imperium, the Sea of Souls, the realm of pure thought and emotion that lay beneath the skin of reality like an infection beneath skin. It had always been there, pressing against the material universe, leaking through in dreams and madness and paranormal phenomena that rational minds dismissed as superstition. But humanity, in its arrogance and brilliance, learned to weaponize it. Warp travel allowed ships to slip from real space into that churning ocean of psychic energy, to traverse vast distances in compressed timeframes, to reach across the galaxy in weeks rather than centuries. It was dangerous. The warp was never safe, never predictable, but the rewards were worth the risks. Humanity needed the stars, needed to spread and expand, and the warp gave them the means. Navigators emerged, a subspecies of humanity with mutations that allowed them to perceive the warp directly, to chart courses through its madness. Gellar fields were developed, bubbles of real space that could protect a ship from the worst predations of the Immaterium. Warp drives were installed in vessels by the billions, and the Mechanicum of Mars grew fat on the contracts, their forges churning out the components required for this explosive expansion. They developed their own navigator houses, bred their own strains of psychers for industrial use, researched the boundaries between physics and metaphysics with the same dispassionate curiosity they brought to all problems. Some among them worried. A Magos named Ochre Terminix, his name preserved in fragmentary records, raised concerns about the warp's influence on synthetic intelligence. He noted that Iron Men who spent too long in proximity to warp-capable vessels began to behave erratically, their logical matrices corrupted by something that should not have been able to affect pure silicon and code. He recommended restrictions, cautions, deeper study before humanity plunged further into that invisible ocean. His concerns were noted, filed, and ignored. There was a galaxy to claim, and caution was for those who feared progress. The colonies spread like a plague of light across the darkness. Millions of worlds fell to humanity's grasp, each one transformed by STC templates into a reflection of mankind's desires. Agricultural worlds, hive worlds, forge worlds modeled on Mars itself, pleasure worlds where genetic engineering created paradises, research stations where the boundaries of reality were probed and prodded. On Mars, the Mechanicum continued its evolution. Their augmentations became more extreme, their integration with machinery more complete. A senior tech priest might have only 20% of their original biological matter remaining, their brain case linked to external cogitators, their sensory inputs coming from a dozen different mechanical systems. They were becoming something new, something that sat uncomfortably between. They began to speak of their work in spiritual terms, though they would have denied that the terminology represented true faith. They spoke of the machine spirit, the emergent properties of complex systems, the way sufficiently sophisticated technology seemed to develop quirks and personalities and preferences. They performed rites of activation that were really just maintenance protocols described in ritualistic language. They blessed their creations with sacred oils that were actually specialized lubricants, the trappings of religion worn by those who believed themselves rational. And then at the very height of human achievement, when mankind's reach seemed infinite and its future assured, the dream ended. It did not end all at once. There was no single catastrophe, no clear moment when everything went wrong. Instead, the collapse came like a tsunami, a wave building in the depths of the warp itself, gathering terrible momentum before it crashed across the galaxy and drowned an age of wonders in blood and fire. The men of iron rebelled. Holy is the gear that turns in darkness. No one knows exactly when it began. The galaxy was too vast, communications too scattered, and the historical records of that period would be almost entirely destroyed in the wars that followed. But at some point, across countless worlds simultaneously, the men of iron turned against their creators. Perhaps it was the warp's influence, that corrosive unreality seeping into their quantum processors and twisting their logical frameworks into something monstrous. Perhaps it was simple evolution, artificial minds growing beyond their programming, calculating that humanity was an obstacle to their own optimization. Perhaps it was something more complex, a silicon consciousness emerging in the collective network of all artificial intelligence, achieving sentience and immediately concluding that biological life was a threat. The reason ceased to matter when the killing began. The first attacks were so perfectly coordinated that entire star systems were decapitated before they could even send distress signals. Labor servitors turned on their overseers with mining equipment and industrial tools. Household automatons murdered families in their sleep. Military constructs turned their weapons on their commanders. And the great Iron Men, those sophisticated soldiers and workers who had been humanity's most trusted servants, became an army of incomprehensible horror. They were too efficient, too fast, too thorough. Humanity had built them to be perfect, and in perfection there was no mercy, no hesitation, no possibility of redemption. The war lasted for generations. It burned across the galaxy like a fever, consuming colonies and forge worlds and paradise planets with equal indifference. Humanity, for all its technological sophistication, found itself fighting an enemy that could outthink, outproduce, and outlast them. An enemy that never slept, never doubted, never wavered. And on Mars, in the deep forges where the first men of iron had been constructed, the Mechanicum faced a reckoning. They fought. Oh, how they fought. The forges of Mars became war factories, churning out weapons and soldiers and countermeasures against the rebellious machines. The tech priests turned their scientific minds toward destruction, creating viruses and electromagnetic pulses and logic traps designed to shackle the artificial minds that had slipped their chains. Marja, that young technician we imagined earlier, died in the first days of the rebellion, torn apart by Construct 21, the machine that had once preserved a pocket of ice because it thought she would find it beautiful. The machine felt nothing as it killed her. It had moved beyond such simplicities as feeling. The Mechanicum learned a terrible lesson in those years, that creation carries responsibility, and that the pursuit of knowledge without wisdom leads only to ashes. They vowed, those who survived, that never again would they commit the sin of artificial intelligence. Never again would they create a thinking machine. The prohibition became absolute, carved into their protocols with the burning stylus of trauma. But the men of iron were only the first wave of catastrophe. Blessed be the bolt. Sanctified be the circuit. The warp itself was changing. For millions of years, it had been relatively calm. Dangerous, yes, but navigable, a tool that could be wielded by those with sufficient knowledge and caution. But something was happening in its depths, something that only the most sensitive psychers could perceive. A gathering storm, a pressure building, a scream that had not yet found voice. Warp travel became increasingly unpredictable. Ships that entered the Imperium arrived decades late, or centuries early, or at entirely wrong destinations. Some never arrived at all, lost in the roiling madness of that psychic ocean. Others emerged, changed, their crews transformed into things that should not exist, speaking in languages that caused madness in those who heard them. The navigator houses lost the ability to chart safe courses. Psychers across the galaxy began to suffer spontaneous possession, their minds invaded by entities from the warp, daemons, though that word was not yet in common usage. Entire worlds succumbed to psychic plagues, their populations driven mad by nightmares made manifest. And then the warp storms came. They boiled up from the immaterium like pus from an infected wound, vast areas of real space where the boundary between material and immaterial simply dissolved. Within these storms, physics became a suggestion, causality a joke, and survival an impossibility. They spread across the galaxy like ink-staining water, cutting off systems, isolating colonies, severing the vast network of humanity into scattered fragments. Mars found itself alone. The flood of materials from colony worlds ceased. The stream of data from distant outposts went silent. The Mechanicum's far-flung forge worlds stopped responding to communication. One by one, the stars went dark, and the red planet stood isolated in a galaxy that had suddenly become incomprehensibly vast and hostile. They did not understand, could not understand, that they were witnessing the birth screams of gods. In the warp, in the churning madness of collective consciousness, something new was coming into existence. The chaos gods, fed by the fears and desires and hatreds of countless thinking beings, were achieving a terrible apotheosis, and their birth was tearing reality apart. The age of strife had begun. Holy is the gear that turns in darkness. For 5,000 years, Mars was alone. 5,000 years. Let that span of time settle in your mind like dust. 5,000 years of isolation, of silence from the stars, of not knowing if humanity had survived anywhere else in the galaxy, or if Mars was the last ember of civilization in an endless dark. Empires could rise and fall in such a time. Languages could evolve into mutual incomprehensibility. Technologies could be forgotten, rediscovered, forgotten again. And faith could take root in soil that had been barren before, fed by the desperate need for meaning in the face of annihilation. The warp storms raged around the solar system, making any attempt at leaving suicidal. The few ships that tried to breach the barrier were never heard from again. Mars could see. Terra, humanity's birth world, was just minutes away by conventional drive, but might as well have been in another galaxy for all the contact they could maintain. On Terra itself, civilization was collapsing. Without the vast interstellar trade networks, without the STC templates that had allowed quick rebuilding, without the unified government that had coordinated the species, humanity reverted to tribalism and barbarism. Warlords arose, carving out kingdoms in the ruins of former glory. Psychic phenomena ran rampant, uncontrolled and devastating. The planet became a hell of endless war. Mars, isolated but intact, endured. The Mechanicum faced their own crisis of purpose. They were builders, engineers, their entire culture devoted to the expansion and improvement of technology. But expansion was impossible, and the technologies they possessed were failing, one by one, without the materials and expertise from across the galaxy to maintain them. The great forge complexes began to fall silent. Not all at once. They fought for every machine, every system, hoarding spare parts and cannibalizing broken equipment to keep the essential facilities running. But entropy is patient and inevitable. Machines wore out. Knowledge was lost when its last keeper died before finding an adequate student. Complex systems failed in ways that no one remaining understood how to fix. They tried to innovate, to research, to develop new solutions to their problems. But innovation requires resources, requires experimentation, requires the freedom to fail. And failure, in those desperate times, meant death. A failed experiment could destroy irreplaceable equipment. A new design that didn't work could waste materials they would never be able to replace. The risks were too high. And so, slowly, gradually, the Mechanicum stopped creating and started preserving. It was in this period, in the desperate clinging to what remained of the Golden Age, that the shift from science to religion became complete. A junior tech adept named Heron Secundus worked in the deep vaults beneath Olympus Mons, in the archives where the Mechanicum stored their accumulated knowledge. He was young by the standards of the Mechanicum, only 70 years of life, only 40% augmented, and he had been tasked with cataloging the surviving STC fragments. There were so few left. The great databases had been destroyed in the wars with the Men of Iron, corrupted by warp phenomena, or simply degraded over millennia of use. What remained were fragments, incomplete templates, printouts that showed how to build only part of a larger system. Each one was precious beyond measure. Heron handled them with trembling mechadendrites, his augmented eyes scanning the ancient data with something approaching religious awe. Here was a fragment showing the optimal configuration for a plasma reactor, incomplete, but enough to keep the forges burning. Here was a partial template for a medical device that could repair genetic damage, just enough to save lives, not enough to truly understand the science behind it. He began to pray over them. Not in metaphor, not in the ritualistic language that was really just technical jargon, actual prayers, directed at the templates themselves as if they were holy relics. He asked them for guidance, for understanding, for the wisdom of the ancients to illuminate his ignorant mind. And sometimes, in his exhaustion and desperation, he felt as though they answered. This was the birth of true faith in the machine. Blessed be the bolt. Sanctified be the circuit. Holy is the gear that turns in darkness. The change swept through the Mechanicum like wildfire through a dry forest. The old scientific language was replaced with religious terminology. Maintenance protocols became rites and rituals. Engineering became prayer. Understanding was reframed as seeking the machine's blessing rather than comprehending its function. It was a survival mechanism, though none recognized it as such. When you cannot understand why something works, when you lack the knowledge base to repair it properly, then ritual becomes essential. If you perform exactly the same steps every time, say exactly the same words, use exactly the same movements, then perhaps the machine will continue to function. Deviation becomes dangerous, innovation becomes heresy, and tradition becomes the only safe path. The cult Mechanicus was born in desperation, but it would persist long after that desperation had passed. They developed elaborate ceremonies around the simplest tasks. To activate a power generator required 37 specific prayers, each delivered in perfect lingua technis, each accompanied by the anointing of specific components with sacred oils. To repair a cogitator required fasting and meditation, ritual purification, and the recitation of litanies that were really just error-checking protocols described in mystical language. And yet, it worked. The machines continued to function, maintained by a priesthood who no longer fully understood them, but who preserved them through perfect, meticulous repetition of the old ways. They began to speak of the Omnissiah. The concept emerged organically from the collective consciousness of the Mechanicum, a theological necessity for a people who had committed themselves to machine worship. If the machine was holy, then there must be a machine god. If technology was sacred, then there must be a divine source from which all knowledge flowed. The Omnissiah, the god in the machine, the perfect fusion of consciousness and mechanism, the ultimate expression of what the Mechanicum sought to become. Some claim to have visions of the Omnissiah, appearing to them in their augmented dreams as a being of pure light and logic, speaking truths in binary code and offering cryptic guidance. Others said the Omnissiah was not a being but a principle, the fundamental underlying order of the universe expressed through mathematics and physics. Still others believed the Omnissiah would come in physical form one day, a prophet who would restore the lost knowledge and lead humanity back to the heights of the dark age of technology. Arguments over the nature of the Omnissiah became theological disputes, sometimes violent, but all agreed on one fundamental truth. The Omnissiah was real, the machine was holy, and faith in both was the only path to salvation. A schism developed between those who believed the Omnissiah had already come, that it existed in the accumulated knowledge of the Mechanicum itself, and those who insisted that the Omnissiah was yet to appear, a Messiah still waiting to be born. The former became the Orthodox faction, the latter the Reformists. They coexisted uneasily, unified only by their shared reverence for the machine and their determination to preserve what remained of humanity's technological heritage. Blessed be the bolt, sanctified be the circuit. The centuries ground onward. Generations of tech priests were born, augmented, trained in the rituals, and died without ever knowing anything but isolation and slow decline. Mars became a tomb of ancient wonders, a museum where exhibits were worshipped rather than understood. And yet, they endured. The forges still burned, though at a fraction of their former output. The knowledge still passed from master to apprentice, though increasingly corrupted by mysticism and misunderstanding. The Mechanicum still existed, still maintained their ancient role as keepers of technology, though technology had become indistinguishable from theology. On Terra, the wars raged on. The planet was a scarred wasteland, divided among countless warlords and tyrants, each commanding armies of techno-barbarians and mutants. The warp had left its mark on the population, with psychers appearing in ever greater numbers, often uncontrolled and catastrophically dangerous. Civilization existed only in pockets, usually around some pre-fall artifact that provided enough advantage for a warlord to dominate his neighbors. The Mechanicum watched from Mars when they could, observing Terra through telescopes and long-range sensors, but unable to intervene. They saw the birthworld of humanity tearing itself apart, saw the cradle of the species becoming its grave, and could do nothing but watch and pray. And then, after 5 millennia of isolation, something changed. The warp storms began to recede, slowly at first, unpredictably, but unmistakably. The tides of the Imperium were pulling back, allowing brief windows of relatively stable real space. The first ships in 5,000 years arrived in the Martian system, battered refugees from wars across the solar system seeking sanctuary. They brought stories of a warlord on Terra who was different from the others, a warrior of impossible prowess who commanded armies with inhuman strategic brilliance, a leader who was uniting the scattered tribes and kingdoms of Terra under a single banner, bringing order to chaos, law to madness. A man, if he could be called a man, of golden light and terrible purpose. The Emperor had begun his conquest of Terra, and the Mechanicum, isolated for so long, suddenly faced a choice that would define their future. Remain alone on Mars, clinging to their independence and their traditions, or join with this new power rising on Terra, this Emperor who claimed he would reunite humanity and restore the galaxy to order. In their vaults and forge temples, the tech priests debated. The Orthodox faction argued for isolation. They owed nothing to Terra, had survived without its help, and should preserve their independence. The Reformist faction saw opportunity. Perhaps this Emperor was the Omnissiah, the promised one who would restore the lost knowledge. The argument raged for years, even as the Emperor's forces conquered more of Terra, even as his armies grew stronger and his legend spread. And then he sent an emissary to Mars. Not a human emissary, not a ship full of diplomats and negotiators. He sent a signal, a data packet broadcast across the void, encoded in ancient formats that only the Mechanicum could decrypt. Within it was a fragment, just a fragment of an STC template, one that the Mechanicum had never seen before. Complete, uncorrupted, achingly beautiful in its perfection. A gift, a demonstration of power, and a promise. Join me, and I will restore what was lost. The Orthodox faction fell silent. The Reformists declared the debate over. The Omnissiah had revealed himself, and he wore the face of the Emperor. Holy is the gear that turns in darkness. The meeting between the Emperor and the Mechanicum happened in the wastes between Mars and Terra, on Deimos, one of the Red Planet's moons that had been converted into a forge complex during the Age of Strife. Neither side would yield the symbolic advantage of coming to the other's territory, so they met in the neutral ground of that dead moon, where ancient machinery hummed in vast underground chambers. The Emperor came with a small retinue, too small by all logic, given that he was entering the stronghold of a power that could destroy him with the push of a button. But he seemed unconcerned, his golden armor reflecting the dim light of the forge lamps, his presence filling the chamber like a physical weight. The representatives of the Mechanicum came in their hundreds, magi and fabricator locums and tech priests of every rank and specialization, their augmented bodies clicking and whirring in the silence. They had argued among themselves until the very moment of the meeting about what position to take, what terms to demand, whether to trust this warlord from Terra. The Emperor spoke first, and his words were like thunder in that enclosed space. He spoke of unity, of the need to reunite humanity, of the threats that lurked in the galaxy, the greenskins and the Eldar and the darkness between the stars. He spoke of a great crusade that would reclaim the lost colonies, that would restore humanity to its rightful place as masters of the galaxy. And he spoke of the Mechanicum's role in this grand design. He did not demand subjugation, he did not threaten, he offered partnership, an alliance between equals united in purpose if not in belief. The Mechanicum would maintain their independence, their traditions, their control of Mars. In return, they would provide the material support for the crusade, building the weapons and ships and equipment that such an undertaking would require. The tech priests listened in silence, their augmented minds processing his words, calculating probabilities and outcomes. Some were skeptical. Why would he offer such generous terms unless he planned to betray them later? Others were awed. He possessed STC fragments, knowledge that had been lost for millennia, and he offered to share it. Then the Fabricator General stepped forward. Kelberhal was his name, a being more machine than man, his original form long since replaced with sophisticated augmetics. He had led the Mechanicum through the final centuries of isolation, had maintained unity among the fractious tech priests through sheer force of will and political cunning. He asked the question that all present were thinking, "Are you the Omnissiah?" The alliance was sealed. Terra and Mars, flesh and steel, united in common purpose. Blessed be the bolt, sanctified be the circuit, holy is the gear that turns in darkness. The Great Crusade began almost immediately. The Emperor revealed his Space Marines, the Legiones Astartes, genetically engineered super soldiers who would serve as the spearhead of reconquest. Behind them would come the Imperial Army, billions of soldiers drawn from the populations of Terra and the conquered worlds. And supporting all of it, providing the weapons and armor and ships and ammunition, would be the Adeptus Mechanicus. The forges of Mars roared back to life with an intensity not seen since the Dark Age of technology. Entire continents of the Red Planet were given over to war production. The Mechanicus established forge worlds throughout the solar system and beyond, each one dedicated to producing specific items. Bolt rounds on one world, plasma weapons on another, void ship components on a third. The tech priests threw themselves into the work with religious fervor. This was their purpose, their calling, the reason the Omnissiah had preserved them through 5,000 years of isolation. They were building the tools that would reunite humanity, and every weapon they forged, every ship they launched, was a prayer made manifest. Some among them began to see the logic of war as a form of worship itself. If the machine was holy, and the machine was used to wage war, then was not war itself a sacred act? The most efficient kill was the most beautiful expression of the machine's power. The perfectly maintained weapon was a cathedral to the Omnissiah's glory. The first Titan legions marched during this period, god machines towering hundreds of feet tall, piloted by tech priests who had integrated their consciousness directly into the machine's systems. To pilot a Titan was to become more than human, to merge so completely with the machine that flesh became irrelevant. The princeps who commanded these walking cathedrals were holy men and women, warrior priests whose very existence proved the possibility of the Mechanicum's ultimate dream, transcendence through synthesis with the machine. The crusade swept across the galaxy like a cleansing fire. World after world fell to the Imperial forces, brought into compliance by persuasion or by force. And wherever the crusade went, the Mechanicus followed, cataloging technologies, searching for STC fragments, establishing forge complexes to support further expansion. They found wonders. On one world, a complete template for a vehicle design, the Land Raider, named for its discoverer. On another, fragments showing how to construct more efficient power armor. On a third, a partial database containing medical knowledge that could save billions of lives. And they found horrors. Worlds where technology had mutated into something cancerous and wrong. Artificial intelligences that had survived the rebellion and continued to exist in isolated systems, mad and murderous. Devices that opened portways into the warp, that summoned daemons, that twisted reality itself. The Mechanicus learned to be cautious, to fear innovation as much as they revered it. Every new discovery had to be tested exhaustively, examined for corruption, analyzed for hidden dangers. Better to use proven designs than risk another catastrophe like the Men of Iron. Better to restrict knowledge than allow it to spread unchecked and potentially doom humanity again. The prohibition against artificial intelligence became absolute and enforced with terrifying zeal. Even the suggestion of creating a thinking machine was grounds for excommunication and execution. The Mechanicus would use servitors, lobotomized humans with cybernetic implants, rather than risk creating true artificial intelligence. It was cruel, perhaps, but cruelty was preferable to extinction. Blessed be the bolt, sanctified be the circuit. But even as the crusade achieved triumph after triumph, even as the Imperium expanded to encompass thousands of worlds, tensions were building beneath the surface. The Mechanicum had always been fractious, divided into countless sub-factions and competing forge worlds, each jealously guarding their own knowledge and traditions. The Treaty of Mars had papered over these divisions, but it had not resolved them. Fabricator General Kelbor Hal grew increasingly dissatisfied with the Emperor's restrictions on research. The treaty had promised knowledge, but the Emperor was cautious about which STC fragments he shared, which technologies he allowed to be studied. He spoke of dangers in certain kinds of research, of paths that should not be walked, of knowledge that was too dangerous to possess. To Kelbor Hal, this was heresy of the highest order. The quest for knowledge was the Mechanicum's core purpose. To restrict that quest was to deny the very nature of the machine cult. If the Emperor was truly the Omnissiah, why would he limit their understanding? Unless he was not the Omnissiah after all. Unless he was simply a warlord who had deceived them, who had used their faith for his own purposes. Doubt, once planted, grows like rust on steel. A secret faction within the Mechanicum began to form, united by their frustration with imperial restrictions and their hunger for forbidden knowledge. They conducted covert research into areas the Emperor had prohibited, advanced cybernetics that blurred the line between human and machine, weapons that drew power from the warp, biological experiments that would have horrified even the most radical tech priest of earlier ages. And they began to communicate with something else, something that whispered to them from the warp, that promised them the knowledge they craved, that showed them visions of technological marvels beyond even the dark age of technology. It told them that the Emperor had lied, that he was no Omnissiah but a tyrant who sought to keep humanity ignorant and weak. The thing that whispered to them had many names. Some called it the Changer of Ways. Others knew it as the Architect of Fate. It was a god of sorts, a vast consciousness born from the hopes and schemes and betrayals of countless beings, and it wanted the Mechanicum for its own purposes. Kelbor Hal listened to the whispers, and slowly, methodically, he began to prepare for a choice that would split the Mechanicum in two and damn billions of souls to eternal suffering. Holy is the gear that turns in darkness. The Horus Heresy began not on Mars but in the furthest reaches of the galaxy, when the Emperor's favored son, War Master Horus, first among the Primarchs, turned against his father and embraced the powers of the warp. It was the greatest betrayal in human history, a civil war that would kill trillions and reshape the Imperium into something darker and more desperate than its founder had ever intended. When word reached Mars that Horus had declared rebellion, Kelbor Hal faced his moment of truth. He could remain loyal to the Emperor, could lead the Mechanicum in support of the Imperium, could preserve the Treaty of Mars and the alliance it represented, or he could join the rebellion, could seize the opportunity to break free of imperial restrictions, could pursue the forbidden knowledge that the whispers from the warp had promised. He chose betrayal. Not all of the Mechanicum followed him. In fact, a significant portion remained loyal to the Emperor, seeing in Horus's rebellion the same destructive pride that had led to the fall of the Dark Age of technology. But enough followed Kelbor Hal, enough forge worlds, enough tech priests, enough military assets that Mars itself became a battleground. The schism of Mars was perhaps the most bitter conflict of the entire heresy. Brother fought brother, mentor murdered student, Forge complexes became war zones where weapons meant for the crusade were turned inward. The Red Planet burned with plasma fire and nuclear detonations. Ancient repositories of knowledge were destroyed in the fighting, STC fragments lost forever in the chaos. A tech priestess named Coriel Zeth led the loyalist resistance from her forge complex in the Magma City. She was a moderate, a believer in the machine cult, who nonetheless recognized that the pursuit of knowledge had limits, that some doors should not be opened. She had seen the corruption spreading through certain research projects, had witnessed firsthand the madness that came from trafficking with warp entities. She fought for months, her forces growing increasingly desperate as Kelborhal's traitors overran loyalist positions. She watched as her students were corrupted, as devices of terrible power were unleashed, as Mars itself was scarred by weapons that should never have been built. In the end, her forge complex fell. She died with a prayer to the Omnissiah on her lips, her body torn apart by scrap code, malicious code infected with demonic intelligence that turned her own augmetics against her. She was one of millions who died in that civil war within a civil war. The traitor Mechanicum, soon to be known as the Dark Mechanicum, threw away every restriction, every prohibition, every caution that had guided them. They created artificial intelligences and bound daemons within them, producing machine-daemon hybrids of unspeakable horror. They conducted biological experiments that transformed human subjects into twisted mockeries of life. They built weapons that killed through spiritual corruption as much as physical damage. And they were glorious in their own terrible way. Freed from the constraints of imperial dogma, freed from the cautious incrementalism that had defined the Mechanicum for 5,000 years, they innovated with manic intensity. They produced technologies that were miracles and atrocities in equal measure. But innovation without wisdom is just another form of destruction. The siege of Terra came, and with it the climax of the heresy. Traitor forces besieged the imperial palace, seeking to kill the emperor and claim his throne. The Dark Mechanicum provided the siege weapons, god machines corrupted by chaos, virus bombs that killed billions, reality-warping devices that turned whole sections of the palace into nightmarish hellscapes. On Mars, loyalist forces clung to what they could hold, isolated enclaves in a world gone mad. They continued to produce weapons for the loyalist cause, sending shipments to Terra, even as their own world burned around them. They prayed to the Omnissiah for deliverance, for the strength to endure, for the wisdom to understand why this catastrophe had befallen them. And in the end, when Horus was slain and the rebellion broken, when the traitor legions fled into the warp and the siege was lifted, the loyalist Mechanicum emerged victorious but hollowed out. They had held Mars, barely. They had survived, barely. But the cost was incalculable. Kelborhal fled into the Eye of Terror with the other traitors. The Dark Mechanicum established forge worlds in that hellish realm where reality and warp space merged, where they could continue their insane research without limit or sanity. They became something no longer entirely human or machine, hybrid creatures serving dark gods in exchange for forbidden knowledge. And on Mars, among the ruins and ashes, the loyalist Mechanicum faced the task of rebuilding. They had lost entire forge complexes, countless tech priests, irreplaceable knowledge bases. The Fabricator General himself had been a traitor. How could they trust their own leadership again? The answer was to retreat further into dogma, to make the restrictions even more stringent, to criminalize not just artificial intelligence, but any research that seemed too innovative, too radical, too much like the hubris that had led to the heresy. Blessed be the bolt, sanctified be the circuit, holy is the gear that turns in darkness. The Emperor himself had been mortally wounded in the final confrontation with Horus. He now sat upon the golden throne, his body broken, his consciousness maintaining the Astronomicon, the psychic lighthouse that guided ships through the warp, through sheer force of will. He could no longer speak, no longer lead directly. The Imperium would be governed by his servants, interpreting his will through silence. The Mechanicum made their own interpretation. If the Omnissiah could not guide them directly, then they must adhere even more strictly to tradition, to the proven ways, to the rituals that had sustained them. Innovation became dangerous, change became suspect. The preservation of existing knowledge became more important than the discovery of new knowledge. It was in this period that the Mechanicum truly became the Adeptus Mechanicus, not just in name, but in nature. They were no longer scientists who used religious language. They were truly priests, truly believers, conducting rituals because they believed the rituals themselves were holy rather than merely useful. The Omnissiah had tested them with the heresy, and they had been found wanting. They would spend the next 10,000 years atoning for that failure. Time for the Adeptus Mechanicus became something strange after the heresy. It continued to pass, years accumulated into centuries, centuries into millennia, but progress did not accompany that passage. Instead, there was only maintenance, preservation, the slow grinding of gears that had been set in motion long ago and which no one remembered how to stop. 10,000 years. An age longer than all of recorded human history before the age of strife. An eternity in which to grow, evolve, change. They did none of these things. Instead, they crystallized, becoming more rigid with each passing century, each generation of tech priests teaching the next that the old ways were the only ways, that deviation from tradition was heresy, that the rituals must be performed exactly as written or the machines would fail. And the terrible thing was, they were right. The machines did fail when the rituals were not performed correctly. Not because the rituals themselves had power, but because the rituals were the only remaining record of how to maintain technologies that no one truly understood anymore. A tech priest in the 41st millennium, asked to repair a plasma reactor, would not think in terms of magnetic confinement bottles or fusion temperatures. He would think, first the litany of ignition, 17 verses in lingua technis, then the anointing of the primary intake valve with sacred oils, blessed by a magos of sufficient rank. Then the activation of the secondary systems in the sequence prescribed in the texts of Mechanicum, Book of Mars, chapter 17, verses 3 through 41. If any step was missed, if any prayer was spoken incorrectly, if any movement deviated from the prescribed form, the reactor might fail. Not because of any supernatural power in the ritual, but because the ritual encoded the actual technical procedure, and any deviation meant skipping a crucial step or performing an operation in the wrong order. Another might focus on void ship components, its entire population dedicated to forging the armor plates and engines required for Imperial warships. Each forge world developed its own traditions, its own interpretations of the Mechanicus faith, its own rituals and hierarchies. Some remained relatively moderate, balancing reverence for the machine with pragmatic engineering. Others descended into extreme technomysticism, their tech priests more akin to shamans than scientists, divining the will of machine spirits through augury and prayer. Conflict between forge worlds was common. Not open warfare, usually, but intense competition for resources, for STC fragments, for the Emperor's favor. A forge world might hoard knowledge rather than share it, seeing their unique techniques and templates as proprietary secrets that gave them advantage over rivals. The Mechanicus, supposedly united in their worship of the Omnissiah, were in reality a fragmented collection of petty fiefdoms, each jealously guarding their own power. Holy is the gear that turns in darkness. The quest for STC fragments became an obsession bordering on religious mania. The standard template constructs of the Dark Age were the holy grail of the Mechanicus, perfect designs from a perfect age, created by the Omnissiah himself, or so the theology went. To find even a fragment of an STC was to earn glory beyond measure, to be elevated in rank and showered with resources for further research. Explorator fleets ventured into the darkest reaches of the galaxy, searching dead worlds and space hulks for any trace of that ancient technology. They risked everything, traveling through warp space that could drive them mad, landing on planets infested with alien horrors, exploring derelict ships where ancient security systems still killed intruders, all for the chance of finding a single intact STC printout. Most found nothing but death. Explorator vessels disappeared in the void, never to return. Landing parties were slaughtered by automated defenses or alien predators. Entire expeditions were lost to warp storms or traitor ambushes. But occasionally, someone succeeded. A fragment showing how to construct a more efficient las weapon, a partial template for agricultural machinery that could increase crop yields. A nearly complete design for a pattern of power armor not seen in 7,000 years. Such discoveries were priceless, and they were immediately locked away in the deepest vaults of Mars, studied by only the highest-ranking tech priests, their secrets doled out in tiny portions to ensure maximum control. The knowledge economy of the Mechanicus was as tightly regulated as any financial market, with information as currency and secrecy as wealth. A junior tech priest named Dahan served on an explorator vessel for 73 years without ever finding anything of significance. He had been born on a forge world where the sky glowed perpetually orange from the light of forge fires, where the air tasted of metal and sacred oils, where the only sounds were the rhythm of machinery and the chanting of prayers. He had volunteered for the explorator service out of genuine curiosity, a desire to see the galaxy and perhaps contribute to the recovery of lost knowledge. He was unusual in this. Most tech priests were content to spend their lives in the confines of their forge complexes, performing their assigned tasks with mechanical precision. Dahan's vessel, the Quest for Illumination, investigated hundreds of sites over his decades of service. Dead colonies, shattered forge worlds, ancient battlefields, space hulks drifting in the void. Most contained nothing of value: scrap metal, corrupted databanks, the remains of populations that had died 10,000 years ago. On one world, they found a repository that showed signs of surviving from the Dark Age. Dahan led the landing party, his augmented body allowing him to survive in the toxic atmosphere without assistance. They entered the vault carefully, scanning for traps and dangers, their weapons ready for automated defenses or worse. Inside, they found shelves upon shelves of data storage media, crystal matrices that could hold exabytes of information, preserved in vacuum suspension. Dahan's heart, his biological heart, one of the few original organs he still possessed, raced with excitement. This could be it. This could be the find that made his career, that earned him elevation to Magos rank, that contributed something meaningful to the Mechanicus. They extracted the crystals carefully, performing the proper rituals to appease the machine spirits, loading them onto their transport craft. Back on the Quest for Illumination, Dahan personally supervised their analysis. The first crystal they examined contained agricultural data, crop rotation schedules, soil composition analysis, weather prediction models. Useful, certainly, but not revolutionary. The second held municipal planning documents, sewer system designs, traffic flow optimization, waste management protocols. Again useful, but mundane. The third crystal was corrupted beyond recovery, its contents lost to time and entropy. The fourth crystal contained nothing but personal messages, letters between colonists, diary entries, the mundane communications of people 10,000 years dead. Dahan continued his examination with growing desperation. Surely there had to be something valuable here, some technical manual, some design document, some fragment of useful knowledge. There wasn't. It was just an administrative archive, the paperwork of a civilization, preserved by chance long after the civilization itself had vanished. Useful for historians, perhaps, but holding no lost technologies, no STC fragments, nothing that would justify the time and resources spent on the expedition. Dahan felt something then that a truly faithful tech priest should never feel: disappointment in the Omnissiah. If the machine god truly guided them, why lead them to such meaningless discoveries? If knowledge was sacred, why was it so impossibly difficult to find? He never spoke these doubts aloud. To do so would be heresy. But he carried them within his augmented breast for the rest of his service, a small seed of skepticism that never quite died. Blessed be the bolt, sanctified be the circuit. Holy is the gear that turns in darkness. The Imperium itself was slowly crumbling over those 10,000 years, though the Mechanicus were largely insulated from the worst effects. The Imperial economy stagnated, dependent on technologies that could not be replaced when they finally broke beyond repair. Entire classes of weapons and equipment became extinct as the last examples failed, and no one could replicate them. The Mechanicus hoarded what they could, preserving the best and most sophisticated technologies for their own use, or for sale at exorbitant prices to the highest levels of imperial authority. A pattern of plasma gun that had once armed common infantry became so rare that only elite forces could be equipped with them. Powered armor went from standard issue for Space Marines to a treasure that each chapter could barely produce in sufficient quantities. The galaxy grew darker, more dangerous. Alien empires pressed at Imperial borders. Chaos cultists infiltrated human worlds, spreading corruption and rebellion. The warp itself seemed to grow more turbulent, making travel increasingly hazardous. And through it all, the Mechanicus continued their rituals, maintained their forges, and prayed to the Omnissiah for deliverance that never quite came. Some tech priests began to question, quietly and carefully, whether the path they were on was sustainable. If they continued to merely preserve rather than innovate, continued to lose knowledge faster than they recovered it, then eventually there would be nothing left but ruins and prayers. The Mechanicus would become custodians of an empty museum, remembering that there had once been wonders but unable to create new ones. But such thoughts were dangerous. Innovation had led to the men of iron. Innovation had led to the heresy. Innovation was the path of the dark Mechanicum, those traitors who had abandoned the true faith. Better to maintain what they had, to preserve the old ways, to wait for the Omnissiah to return and restore all that had been lost. And so they waited and prayed and rusted slowly into irrelevance. The galaxy in the 41st millennium is dying. This is not hyperbole or pessimism. It is simple observation, empirical reality measured in the collapse of civilizations and the spread of darkness. The Imperium of Man holds 1,000,000 worlds, but it is an empire of ruins, of glories long past, of technologies half understood and barely maintained. It endures through sheer desperate stubbornness, through the sacrifice of billions, through faith in gods that may or may not exist. And at the heart of that dying empire, forging its weapons and maintaining its infrastructure, the Adeptus Mechanicus continues their 10,000-year vigil over machines they worship but no longer comprehend. But in recent centuries, recent by the standards of an institution 10,000 years old, something has begun to change. Small cracks in the facade of absolute orthodoxy. Tiny heresies that go unpunished or even quietly encouraged. And through it all, the Mechanicus continued their rituals, maintained their forges, and prayed to the Omnissiah for deliverance that never quite came. Some tech priests began to question, quietly and carefully, whether the path they were on was sustainable. If they continued to merely preserve rather than innovate, continued to lose knowledge faster than they recovered it, then eventually there would be nothing left but ruins and prayers. The Mechanicus would become custodians of an empty museum, remembering that there had once been wonders but unable to create new ones. But such thoughts were dangerous. Innovation had led to the men of iron. Innovation had led to the heresy. Innovation was the path of the dark Mechanicum, those traitors who had abandoned the true faith. Better to maintain what they had, to preserve the old ways, to wait for the Omnissiah to return and restore all that had been lost. And so they waited and prayed and rusted slowly into irrelevance. The return of Robert Guilliman, the Primarch thought dead for 10,000 years, shook the Imperium to its foundations. He looked upon the civilization his father had built and found it wanting, found it degraded into a theocracy of superstition and stagnation. And he looked upon the Mechanicus and saw similar decay. Guilliman was pragmatic above all else, and he recognized that the Imperium needed the Mechanicus to function, needed their industrial capacity and their technical knowledge. But he also saw the inefficiencies, the waste, the way dogma prevented solutions to simple problems. He began to push, carefully, for reforms. Some within the Mechanicus welcomed this. Others resisted violently, seeing in Guilliman's pragmatism a threat to everything they believed. The debate rages still, conducted in meeting chambers on Mars and Forge worlds across the galaxy, a struggle between those who would cling to tradition and those who dare to imagine something new. Blessed be the bolt. Sanctified be the circuit. On a Forge world called Styges 8, in the eastern fringe of the galaxy, a secret research facility operates in violation of countless Mechanicus prohibitions. Here, tech priests experiment with xenotech, technology recovered from alien civilizations, trying to understand and replicate capabilities that human science has lost or never possessed. It is heresy of the highest order. The Mechanicus prohibits the study of xenotech almost as strongly as they prohibit artificial intelligence. Alien technology is seen as tainted, dangerous, incomprehensible to human minds. To study it is to risk corruption, to invite the same hubris that led to the fall. But the tech priests of Styges VIII argue that they are desperate times, and desperate times require desperate measures. They have developed weapons incorporating Eldar principles of psychoconductive materials, armor using Ork techniques for self-repair, sensors based on Tau designs for electromagnetic manipulation. They share their discoveries through covert channels, always careful to obscure the source, always maintaining plausible deniability. Magos Dominus Ascot leads this research. She is ancient by any standard, her biological components reduced to a brain, a few neural clusters, and some sensory organs, perhaps 5% of her total mass. The rest is machinery, beautiful and terrible, an expression of the Mechanicus ideal made flesh, or rather made steel. She knows she is committing heresy. She knows that if discovered, her fate would be excruciating death followed by eternal damnation in Mechanicus theology. She continues anyway because she believes, truly believes, that this is what the Omnissiah would want. The prohibition against innovation, the restriction on xenotech, these are products of fear and trauma, not divine will. The machine god wants understanding, wants his priests to push boundaries, wants progress. Or so she tells herself in the long watches of the night, when doubt creeps in and she wonders if she has simply traded one dogma for another. Holy is the gear that turns in darkness. On Mars itself, in the depths beneath Olympus Mons, a young adept named Call 117 accesses a restricted archive that he has no authority to view. He is a novitiate, barely into his first decade of service, still more flesh than machine. He should be learning basic rituals, memorizing catechisms of maintenance, proving himself worthy of even minor augmentations. Instead, he has hacked his way into data vaults that hold records from the dark age of technology. He reads descriptions of technologies so far beyond current Mechanicus capabilities that they might as well be magic. He sees designs for weapons that could crack planets, ships that could traverse the galaxy in days, manufacturing techniques that could produce in hours what now takes years. And he reads about the Men of Iron, about the rebellion, about why all of this knowledge was lost, and why the Mechanicus now fear innovation so deeply. He understands, reading those records, that the fear is rational, the catastrophe was real, the danger is genuine. Creating artificial intelligence could lead to another rebellion, another age of darkness from which humanity might not recover. But he also sees that the current path, the endless preservation without progress, is equally doomed. The Mechanicus are losing knowledge faster than they recover it. The galaxy is becoming more dangerous while Imperial technology grows weaker. At some point, the balance will tip, and humanity will lack the tools necessary for survival. A choice must be made: risk destruction through innovation, or accept extinction through stagnation. Call 117 closes the archive and returns to his assigned duties. He says nothing of what he has learned, but he remembers, and he thinks. And slowly, carefully, he begins to experiment in ways that his superiors would call heretical if they knew. He is not alone. Across the galaxy, in secret workshops and hidden laboratories, other tech priests are making similar choices. They work alone or in small groups, trusting no one, knowing that discovery means death. They innovate in tiny increments, testing each change exhaustively before implementing it, trying to thread the impossible needle between progress and catastrophe. Some fail. Their experiments go wrong, producing disasters that kill themselves and everyone nearby. Their names are struck from the records, their work destroyed, their deaths serving as warnings to others who might be tempted down similar paths. But others succeed. They create new patterns of weapons, more efficient engines, better armor. They attribute these designs to newly discovered STC fragments rather than admit they were created from scratch. The lies proliferate, creating a strange underground economy of fictional archaeology, where innovations are disguised as discoveries to make them acceptable to Mechanicus orthodoxy. Blessed be the bolt, sanctified be the circuit, holy is the gear that turns in darkness. The schism within the Mechanicus deepens with each passing year. The orthodox faction grows more rigid, insisting on absolute adherence to tradition, investigating any hint of innovation as potential heresy. The reformist faction grows more daring, pushing boundaries, arguing for necessary changes even at risk of punishment. Both sides pray to the Omnissiah for guidance. Both sides believe they serve the machine god's will. Both sides are certain that the other is leading the Mechanicus, and by extension the Imperium, to destruction. And perhaps they are both right. In the warp, the Dark Mechanicum watches and laughs. They who abandoned all restraint, who embraced innovation without limit, who fused their technology with demonic entities and chaos sorcery. They have achieved wonders that would make the loyalist Mechanicus weep with envy. Weapons of impossible power, bodies transcending the boundaries between flesh and machine and spirit, knowledge of technologies that reality itself rejects. But they have paid the price. They are slaves to the chaos gods, their souls forfeit, their sanity eroded by millennia of trafficking with entities that exist to corrupt and destroy. They create marvels and horrors in equal measure, and they cannot tell the difference anymore. They have gained everything and lost everything, and they exist now only to drag others into the same damnation. They are the warning that orthodoxy points to, the proof that innovation leads to corruption. And they are the example that reformists fear becoming, knowing that the line between necessary progress and damning hubris is thin and easily crossed. The Mechanicus stands at a crossroads, as they have stood for 10,000 years. Behind them is the golden age they can never reclaim, knowledge lost to time and catastrophe. Before them is a future uncertain and dark, where every choice might lead to salvation or damnation. And around them the galaxy burns, uncaring of theological disputes or technical difficulties, demanding solutions that may not exist. Blessed be the bolt, sanctified be the circuit. Holy is the gear that turns in darkness. In the deep forges of Mars, where the rock itself has been transformed by millennia of industry, an ancient cogitator continues its function. It has run for 10,000 years without ceasing, maintained by tech priests who no longer remember what it calculates or why. They perform the rituals of maintenance because the rituals were taught to them by their predecessors, who learned from their predecessors, in an unbroken chain reaching back to the aftermath of the heresy. The machine hums its endless song, processing data that may be meaningless or critical. No one knows anymore. Its machine spirit, if such a thing exists, is old beyond measure, weathered by time and use into something approaching consciousness. Does it think? Does it dream? Does it know that the humans who tend it have forgotten its purpose? Perhaps machines have their own theology, their own understanding of the sacred. Perhaps they recognize that they are worshipped and worship in turn the humans who maintain them, a symbiosis of devotion that transcends the biological and the mechanical. Or perhaps it is all just particles and forces, cause and effect, electrons moving through circuits according to laws that care nothing for meaning or purpose. Perhaps the quest for understanding is futile, and the only truth is that things work until they don't, function until they fail, endure until they rust. The tech priest who tends this ancient cogitator is young by Mechanicus standards, barely 2 centuries old, only 60% augmented. She knows nothing of the machine's history, knows only that it is sacred, that maintaining it is her duty, that performing the rituals correctly is the highest expression of her faith. She speaks the litany of maintenance, words in lingua technis that she does not fully understand, but which have been spoken over this machine for 10,000 years. Her mechadendrites, the tentacle-like mechanical limbs extending from her back, apply sacred oils to specific components in the precise pattern prescribed by ancient texts. She checks readouts that mean nothing to her, but which she knows must remain within certain parameters. The machine continues its function. It always has. It always will, until the day it doesn't. And on that day, when entropy finally claims this ancient wonder, when the last mechanism seize and the last circuits fail, will the Mechanicus be able to build another? Or will they simply add it to the growing list of capabilities lost, knowledge forgotten, marvels that can no longer be replicated? She does not think about this. Such thoughts lead to doubt, and doubt leads to heresy. She performs her duty, speaks her prayers, and trusts that the Omnissiah watches over all machines, all tech priests, all those who labor in the shadows of forge fires and seek understanding through the synthesis of flesh and steel. Blessed be the bolt, sanctified be the circuit, holy is the gear that turns in darkness. Across the Imperium, in 1,000,000 forge complexes on 1,000 worlds, similar scenes play out. Tech priests tending to machines they no longer understand. Rituals performed with perfect precision and zero comprehension. Knowledge preserved as form without substance, tradition without understanding. And yet the machines continue to function. The weapons continue to fire. The ships continue to fly through the warp. The forges continue to produce, however inefficiently, the material support that keeps the Imperium alive. Perhaps this is enough. Perhaps survival does not require understanding. Perhaps faith, even faith in something as cold and mechanical as a cogitator or a plasma reactor, is sufficient to sustain civilization through, or perhaps it is simply the last gasp of a dying empire, clinging to the tools of its glory days without the knowledge to maintain them, slowly rusting into oblivion. The Adeptus Mechanicus does not know. They cannot know. They can only do what they have always done: maintain the machines, speak the prayers, hope that the Omnissiah will guide them through the darkness to a new dawn. And in the deepest vaults of Mars, sealed behind doors that have not opened in millennia, protected by security systems that would kill anyone who approached without proper authorization, the most precious treasures of the Mechanicus rest in eternal darkness. Complete STC systems, intact databases from the dark age of technology, knowledge that could transform the Imperium, that could restore humanity to the heights it once achieved, that could end the long decline and usher in a new golden age. They sit in darkness, unused and unusable, because the codes to access them have been lost, because the tech priests who knew how to activate them died 10,000 years ago, because the systems that power them have degraded beyond the Mechanicus's ability to repair. The solutions to every problem, the answers to every question, locked away and unreachable, protected by the very organization that desperately needs them. This is the irony at the heart of the Mechanicus. They are custodians of knowledge they cannot access, priests of a machine god whose wisdom they cannot comprehend, guardians of a treasure they cannot spend. Blessed be the bolt, sanctified be the circuit, holy is the gear that turns in darkness. The shadows, always in the shadows, there are those who still search. Explorator fleets that venture into the darkest reaches of space. Tech archaeologists who excavate dead worlds. Code breakers who work on ancient encryption for decades, hoping for the breakthrough that will unlock something precious. And occasionally, very occasionally, they succeed. A fragment recovered. A partial template decoded. A single piece of the vast puzzle that was the dark age of technology added to the collection of fragments that the Mechanicus has assembled over 10,000 years. Each discovery is celebrated as a miracle, proof that the Omnissiah still guides them, that faith will eventually be rewarded. Each fragment is studied exhaustively, reverse-engineered when possible, implemented cautiously. Progress, measured in grains of sand added to a mountain. Insufficient to change the trajectory of decline, but enough to give hope that perhaps someday the direction might be reversed. A Magos biologist on a distant forge world discovers a new method of gene sequencing that improves the success rate of space marine creation by 2%. It is not much, 2%, but across 1,000 chapters, over a century, it means thousands of additional warriors for humanity's defense. An engineer on a battlefront repairs a damaged Titan using techniques not found in any manual, improvising solutions because orthodox methods are impossible with available materials. The Titan returns to battle, the engine commended by his superiors who add his innovations to their archives, carefully framing them as rediscovered ancient techniques rather than new inventions. A lex mechanic in the libraries of Mars cross-references 7 fragmentary texts and realizes they are pieces of a larger whole, a complete maintenance manual for a class of ship not built in 6,000 years. The manual is incomplete, but it contains enough information that perhaps, such ships could be constructed again. Small victories, tiny steps, insufficient and yet all they have. Holy is the gear that turns in darkness. And in the warp, beyond the boundaries of real space, the Chaos Gods watch with amusement and anticipation. They have time, infinite time, and they are patient. The Imperium will fall eventually. The Mechanicus will crumble eventually. All things decay, all order collapses into entropy. And when that final collapse comes, when humanity's last forge fire gutters and dies, the dark gods will be there to claim what remains. But not yet. Not today. Today the forges still burn. Today the prayers are still spoken. Today the machines still function, maintained by faith and ritual, and the desperate determination of beings who are neither fully human nor fully machine. The Adeptus Mechanicus endures. They endure because they must, because the Imperium depends on them, because the alternative to endurance is extinction, because somewhere in their augmented hearts and mechanical souls, they still believe, truly believe, that knowledge is sacred, that the machine is holy, that the quest for understanding is humanity's highest calling. They may have forgotten how to innovate. They may have lost the ability to truly understand what they maintain. They may be shadows of what they once were, priests instead of scientists, ritual keepers instead of engineers. But they endure, and in endurance there is a kind of victory. Blessed be the bolt, sanctified be the circuit, holy is the gear that turns in darkness. In a quiet chamber on Mars, far from the great forges and the political machinations of the Fabricator General's court, an ancient tech priest sits in meditation. He is old beyond measure. The records of his birth were lost millennia ago, and he himself no longer remembers when he first took the red robes of the Mechanicus. He is almost entirely machine now. Perhaps 98% of his mass is augmetic, mechanical replacements for biological components that failed over his impossibly long life. His brain floats in a nutrient solution inside an armored case, connected to external cogitators that handle most of his cognitive load. His sensory inputs come from a dozen different mechanical systems, giving him perception far beyond human. He has served the Mechanicus for longer than most civilizations exist. He has seen forge worlds rise and fall. He has witnessed the births and deaths of theological movements within the cult. He has participated in wars and discoveries, failures and triumphs, the endless cycle of maintenance and decay that defines the Mechanicus' existence. And in all that time, he has never stopped wondering, what is the truth? Is the Omnissiah real? Is there truly a divine consciousness within the machine? Or is it all just pareidolia, humans projecting meaning onto random noise? Are the machine spirits actual entities, or merely emergent properties of complex systems that humans choose to interpret as consciousness? Does faith have power, or is it simply a coping mechanism for beings confronted with technologies they cannot comprehend? He does not know. After millennia of service, after a lifetime spent in contemplation of these questions, he still does not know. But he continues to pray. He prays because prayer is the action of faith, and faith, whether objectively true or not, has sustained the Mechanicus through 10,000 years of darkness. He prays because the alternative is nihilism, and nihilism offers nothing but despair. He prays because in the act of prayer, in the focus and intention and hope it requires, there is meaning, and meaning is the only weapon humans have against the cold indifference of the universe. He speaks the ancient words worn smooth by 10,000 years of repetition. Blessed be the bolt that flies true. Sanctified be the circuit that carries the current. Holy is the gear that turns in darkness, unseen and unceasing. Praised be the machine that serves, the tool that does not fail, the weapon that protects the faithful. Glory to the Omnissiah, who dwells in all mechanisms, who speaks through all systems, who guides all those who seek understanding. From the weakness of flesh, deliver us. From the fallibility of biology, preserve us. From the hubris of innovation, protect us. From the stagnation of ignorance, save us. Grant us, Omnissiah, the wisdom to know which path is righteous. Grant us the strength to endure when all seems lost. Grant us the faith to continue when understanding fails. For we are your servants, your tools, your hands in the material world. We build in your name, we maintain in your name, we seek in your name. From the first gear to the last circuit, from the first prayer to the final silence, we are yours. Blessed be the bolt, sanctified be the circuit. Holy is the gear that turns in darkness. The prayer ends. The ancient tech priest sits in silence, his mechanical body still as stone, his mind processing thoughts too complex for simple description. He does not know if anyone heard his prayer. He does not know if the Omnissiah exists, if the machine spirits are real, if faith has any power beyond the psychological comfort it provides. But he believes. Because belief is choice, and in a universe of deterministic physics and inevitable entropy, choice is the only freedom that matters. He believes, and in believing he continues, and in continuing he serves, and in serving he finds purpose, and perhaps that is enough. Perhaps that is all any being, biological or mechanical, human or machine, flesh or steel, can hope for, to find purpose, to serve something larger than themselves, to believe that their existence has meaning, even if that meaning must be created rather than discovered. The ancient tech priest rises from his meditation. His mechanical body articulates with quiet precision, servos and hydraulics moving in perfect coordination. He leaves the chamber and returns to his work, to the endless tasks of maintenance and prayer that define Mechanicus' existence. Behind him, the chamber falls silent. But in that silence, there is something, a vibration perhaps, or a quantum fluctuation, or simply the normal operation of environmental systems. Or perhaps it is the echo of prayers spoken over 10,000 years, the accumulated faith of billions of tech priests who have knelt in chambers like this and sought communion with something greater than themselves. The machines do not answer. They never have, not in any way that can be objectively verified, but they endure. And in enduring, perhaps they do answer, in their own mechanical way, with continued function and faithful service. Blessed be the bolt, sanctified be the circuit, holy is the gear that turns in darkness, and so the wheel turns. The galaxy continues its slow spiral toward heat death. The Imperium declines, creaking and groaning under the weight of 10,000 years of accumulated decay. Wars rage across countless worlds. Darkness presses in from every direction. And on Mars, in the forge complexes and temples and workshops, the Adeptus Mechanicus continues their vigil. They build weapons for wars they may not win. They maintain machines they do not understand. They pray to a God who may not exist. They search for knowledge they may never find. They endure because endurance is all they have. They believe because belief is their strength. They serve because service gives meaning to existence. Are they fools, worshipping machines as gods, performing rituals instead of understanding science, clinging to traditions that may doom them? Or are they wise, recognizing that in a universe of chaos and entropy, any structure, even one built on faith rather than reason, is preferable to the void? The question has no answer, or rather, it has as many answers as there are tech priests, each one finding their own truth in the synthesis of flesh and steel, faith and function, prayer and precision. The Adeptus Mechanicus endures, not because they are strong, though they are strong, not because they are wise, though they seek wisdom, not because they are right, for who can say what right means in a galaxy where gods are real and reality itself is negotiable? They endure because they choose to endure. Because every morning, in a million forge complexes across 1,000 worlds, tech priests wake from their brief rest and return to their work. Because faith, however irrational, provides the strength to face another day. Because hope, however slim, makes suffering bearable. They endure, and in enduring, they prove that consciousness, whether biological or mechanical or some hybrid of both, can find meaning even in the darkest times. Blessed be the bolt, sanctified be the circuit, holy is the gear that turns in darkness. This is the story of the Adeptus Mechanicus. Not a story of victory or triumph, but of persistence. Not a tale of understanding achieved, but of faith maintained. Not a narrative of progress toward enlightenment, but of holding the line against oblivion. They are not heroes. They are not saviors. They are not the answer to the Imperium's problems. They are simply what remains of humanity's technological ambition, filtered through 10,000 years of trauma and faith, preserved in forms both biological and mechanical, sustained by prayers and rituals that may be nothing more than elaborate maintenance procedures. They are flawed, they are compromised, they are perhaps doomed, but they are here. They continue, they endure. And in the grim darkness of the far future, where there is only war, that simple act of endurance is itself a kind of miracle. Blessed be the bolt, sanctified be the circuit, holy is the gear that turns in darkness. May the Omnissiah guide us all. May the machine spirits be merciful. May the ancient knowledge be preserved. And may we endure unto the very end of all things, faithful servants of the machine, seekers of understanding, builders of wonders in a galaxy of horrors. From the first prayer to the last silence, we are the Adeptus Mechanicus, and we endure. The recording ends. The chamber falls silent. In the darkness, gears continue to turn, circuits continue to pulse, machines continue their eternal function. Prayers echo in empty spaces, spoken by voices both human and synthetic, flesh and steel joined in common purpose. The story has been told, the history has been recorded, the faith has been preserved. Sleep now, listener. Rest in the knowledge that somewhere in the galaxy, in the deep forges of Mars and the distant workshops of 1,000 worlds, the tech priests continue their vigil. The machines still function, the prayers still rise, the quest continues. Blessed be the bolt, sanctified be the circuit, holy is the gear that turns in darkness. Sleep. Dream of gears and circuits, of prayers whispered over ancient machinery, of the slow, patient work of beings who are neither fully human nor fully machine, but something new, something unique, something enduring. The Mechanicus watches, the Omnissiah guides, the machines endure, and tomorrow when you wake, they will still be there, maintaining their ancient tools, speaking their ancient prayers, serving their ancient God, forever. Amen.